Welcome to the Compliance Alliance Power Half Hour, and I am over the moon excited about this particular topic and the guests that I have with me today. Today we have Rachel Suppalla and Jen Gaudioso, CEO, COO partnership. We call it the YinYang of leadership, but also Rachel's going to talk about her just brand new released book with Vision Tree and Vision Tree Leadership. And welcome, ladies. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello. I'm so excited
for having us.
So the reason why I thought this was a topic our guests would really want to lean into is there's a point in our growth where you can't do it without a COO. Whatever you call that person, VP of operations, it maybe could go by different titles, but we really want to lean into that yin yang of leadership. And I'm going to start with you, Rachel, because you had a vision about why you needed a Jen. So let's start with just that. Like, at what point did you know, in order for me to grow, I'm going to need this particular person? Because this story is amazing. So start first with when you knew, and then we'll talk about the journey.
As I started to grow, all of my leaders have been organic leaders, meaning they were grown within my company. And I didn't hire from the outside. And so I assumed long ago that I could just groom a leader into a Jen, into this position. And I learned that it's a special skill set and not everybody has those skills. And so that was when I started to kind of was beating my head like I'm doing too much, and the people that I'm grooming that's not their skill set. So I think that's when I was around 3 schools, and I knew I wanted to continue growing, and I knew if I wanted to continue growing that I couldn't do it without bringing in a Jen. And I literally called it a Jen, and I can tell the story now because but back in the day, I worked with Jen Slavin in the Child Care Success Academy, and she worked for Natery at the time, and I loved her role with Natery, and so I joked that I needed a Jen, and then I would say everybody needs a Jen. So even back then, I knew it was a Jen, but it just happened to be actual Jen.
So when you say you were at 3 schools and you started the journey of finding the Jen, describe what that looked like. Like, how did you even approach that? Because I think that's what our listeners are thinking about. Like, when will I know? And what were some of the key pivotal points that I had to take a fresh look at? I can't, as the owner and leader, do it all. So when did that happen?
So people do it differently, but for me, I knew I didn't want to, I couldn't, if I needed to grow, I needed to still protect our cash flow so that we could continue to grow. So I knew that bringing on a Jen meant that I had to get a certain level revenue wise. Mine was 3 million was the mark for me. 3 million revenue so that I could afford to bring on a Jen, but also when I approached that with Jen, we still couldn't really afford, what she's worth and whatever. But so we negotiated with her a base pay, then plus sales and plus growth, bonuses on top of that. So that's something that I talk to people about is, you might not be able to afford a high salary at first, but you can negotiate that. And if you do actually grow like you plan to grow, and you will, if you bring on the right person, then they will get compensated for that along with your growth. So financially is the piece, but also you have to protect the safety of that person and of you, because this person is going to become is going to become your person. So there's that relationship safety piece that's huge in the very beginning, and that starts with the influence.
Right. So to you, Jen, the Jen, this is the forever Jen. And when I think about if I were in your shoes, there was an element of risk. You might have been thinking to yourself, like, what am I doing? I'm taking a pay cut. This is an unknown. So talk to us a little bit about that part of the journey of coming together to create the yin and the yang. And then I have a couple other questions for you about how to take this brilliant mind and make it operational. You're already
Yeah.
operational, but how do you break it down to execute? So Jen, that moment where you're like, do I jump or not jump?
So it was really hard because it was a real like emotional time for myself personally. I had just lost my uncle and I was making a shift. I was relocating. I needed to start fresh. And when Rachel and I started to talk and, negotiate, it was really scary. But the more that I talked to her, the more that I saw, and I tell her this all the time, like seeing all of her social media posts and just seeing the leadership team that she built, there was just something in my gut that told me it was the right thing to do
Yep.
and to say yes. And I like trust was huge. And I mean, yes, we knew each other, but we weren't like the besties and we're always together. Like we just knew each other. And it was just that connection that we had. And there was just that I went with my gut feeling and I said yes. And I'm glad I did because look at me today. Like here I am as her COO and that trust is still there. And I took the risk and I'm so happy that I did.
And you're building on it. I mean, every day you
Yes.
guys are creating. So you went from 3 schools and then where are you now, Rachel?
We have 10 and we are in negotiations for more. That's all I can say at this
So
day
at this
moment.
point, maybe when this airs in April, you might be able to share more, but either way, we'll be following your journey. But with that, this is the part where we want to lean into. So Rachel, I've known you for quite some time now, and you have these brilliant ideas. And
Oh,
always. And it's like, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? And I can relate to that, but I'm the type of person who can think strategically and then I act and implement tactically. So there's a skill set there to say, how do you rein that in? So Jen, I'm going to ask you the question. How do you take this brilliant mind and decide what's the priority and how to operationalize it, if that's a word, in order for you to execute on it? Because that's a skill. And Rachel recognized she needed a Jen to help her do that. So talk about that.
well, first you have to, I'm very good at being down for whatever, our DFW, but
Yes.
also it's having that open mind, like that openness to it too. And I've told Rachel this all the time, and we actually talk about it once in a while. Like I was actually in my former life the most pessimistic person ever. And being part of her team, like in the beginning and being groomed by her just over these past 2 years, like now I'm like open for anything. I'm like, okay, let's do it. So I most likely always say yes to any of her ideas. One of the pieces that I think where I've grown since being with Rachel when it comes to making part of her vision come to life is I was that person that always said yes to her. And I'm like, yep, I can do that. Yep, I can do that. Yes, I can do that. And now, 2 years into it, now I'm to the point where, okay, like I listen to it. I, get that solution orientated mind, but then I also ask her more questions to it. Like, where do we need, what do we want to do? When do we want to have this done by? So then I'm able to take that and prioritize it and say, okay, like, yes, we can do this. I can get this done. Then we can do this. And then let's do that. So it's I don't it, to me, like when it comes to that strategic and like timeline, it's a lot of common sense. Like, okay, well, what can you do? How are we going to make this happen? Let's put those thoughts in place. Let's talk about it. We collaborate. Like we just figure it out. And then her and I just bounce everything back and forth. And she'll be like, yep, that's a great idea. Let's do it that way. Or, well, maybe we should do it this way. So let's pivot and do that. So I really think it's having that open mind, being very OCD in getting things accomplished and just being able to execute and have that support to do it. And when she gives me something to do, I just run with it. I give her updates. She has that again, it goes back to that trust.
Trust, 100%, 100%. So Rachel, has Jen ever said no to you?
Yeah, well, so I tell her to say no. Like she said, yeah, at first she was saying yes a lot. And I told her, I need you to push back. I need you to say no, or I need you to prioritize or help me prioritize. And like she was saying, she started asking a lot more questions, which does help me. But also, I have a very strategic brain. So I have the idea. I have lots of ideas, like you said. And when Jen asks questions, that's when the strategic part of my brain kicks in. And so I'm able to, build that strategy. And then she then is able to prioritize and execute. So I think we work really well together in that because we can come up with strategy. And while we're coming up with a strategy, that's when the prioritizing comes in. Or she'll say something like, the other day, we're planning this book launch. My daughter is getting married June 7th, and my life is insane, right? And so I'm deciding to do a book tour in the middle of this. And Jen's like, can you do all of this with, Allie's wedding? And I'm like, sure, yeah, it's fine, sure. And then she's like, take Friday off, really focus on the wedding, get all the stuff you need done for the wedding. And that helped, just that tiny suggestion helped tremendously, because I was able to then, like, because I'm a hyper focused person, right? So then I'm like, okay, hyper focus on the wedding, get all that done, check, check, check. Okay, next.
Right. Exactly. So with that, I mean, as our audience is listening to this, you have figured out which role each of you will play. But if you had to say in this journey, how did you delineate the leadership responsibilities, CEO, COO? What went into that? And if you had to say, these are like the three areas, if you had to prioritize, what would you say?
I would say Jen definitely is operations, and she's really good at, she comes from a background of like sales and vendor relationships and all of that. So naturally, I didn't think this at the beginning, but it just happened organically. She, has all those vendor relationships with us, and she's also really good at like organizing, our tech stack and budgets and things like that. So she's really good at kind of cutting down and making sure it's all streamlined. And I'm the big relationships, all the finance is on my side, marketing, because that's my, influence brain, and all of that is kind of where I live. And then coaching, I still do mentoring and coaching with our team, which I love. And that, well, I backed away from operations completely for a little bit, and had Jen, oversee the regionals, oversee the directors, all of that. And I felt like our team was lacking that coaching piece, and I was also missing that. I felt disconnected. So now I come in as coach and mentor, and I'm not their direct report, but I am their coach and mentor, which works out really well. So I'm glad we kind of weaved that back into it.
That makes perfect sense. And it's your unique brilliance, and that's what you speak on, you train on. And I'm sure the staff loves to see you when you come to their schools and provide that type of coaching, and your face just being there, that you're a present owner, which is huge.
I'm in Utah today.
Yes. So to bring our two worlds together, at the Compliance Alliance, we talk about SOPs, we talk about checklists, we talk about audits. Tell us what DKZ does, like what you do to really operationalize that and make it living and breathing. It's not a one and done. So that's a big question for the amount of time that we have. But if you had to distill it down, why is that so important?
Sorry, somebody came in. Say it again.
Either one of you could answer this, but I know you've spent quite a bit of time building the standard operating procedures, the SOPs, the checklists, and audits. Like, you really do that well, and it shows up. So if somebody's just trying to figure out how to get started with that, because some of the audience, they think, oh, well, we just always have done it this way. So they think it's being done versus being intentional about it. So answer that question however you want. Like, how did that play in your growth? Why was that so important to bring our two worlds together?
Yeah, so I was actually coaching or speaking on this recently, and it didn't come up it came up organically in the conversation. People were saying, these are our pain points. And, one teacher would say, I'm doing this. One teacher would say, I'm doing this for this company that I was coaching. And I said, so then there's no system. Well, yeah, we do this and no. Like there's no system. We need an SOP for the way that we potty train or the way that we clean the tables or the way that, so that's kind of how it happened in my company. And this was pre-Jen. I started seeing all of these pain points, and I call it the practically perfect day, which you've heard me talk about before, going through our entire day and our week and our month in our company, and everything that needed to happen to make our practically perfect day needed to become an SOP. So that, and then anytime anybody asked me a question or any of our leadership, I said that needs to turn into an SOP. Now, years later, all of our leaders create SOPs. And whenever there's a job, like a new role, like an enrollment specialist or Jen's role, or, any kind of role that comes up, we have them create SOPs specifically for their role, so that that's all in our, master SOPs. And it's a living, breathing document. It's not a binder that sits on a shelf. It's something that we constantly are updating daily.
Right. And I think the ingredient that you've perfected is it's the SOP, but then you have the scorecard. So there should never be a day where somebody says, I didn't know that, right? When
Totally my pet peeve. That was like what, part of where it was born from is when people would, because we had I thought we had great training, we had great onboarding, we had all of this stuff. And I'm like, what do you mean you weren't told this? Like that was so that is where the SOPs came from. And still, like I said, to this day, if somebody doesn't know something or they do it incorrectly or we get a complaint or, something like that, I'm like, redo the SOP. Like it needs to be fixed. And yes, the scorecards are our systems of accountability. So we have the SOPs. This is what tells us how our process and procedures should be happening. But we have the scorecards, which are done weekly as a self-check. So then the teachers, directors, everybody in our company is constantly like their own self have these checklist scorecards. Then monthly, their direct report completes their scorecard on them and then goes, the big piece that's missing, what a lot of people don't do with scorecards, is the continuous feedback recognition, which happens monthly on the one-on-ones. So that's a super important piece because it takes the scorecard, so that you can like see what's happening, where the gaps are, how we can fix them, but it also humanizes it because scorecards are meant to be non-subjective. It's just a system to figure out where the gaps are, fix them, move on. However, there is this human piece that needs to still be part of it. So that continuous feedback recognition on the one-on-ones builds that relationship, that trust, like Jen's saying, so that you can be like, oh, okay, it's not because you hate me. That's why you scored me low. It's, it's literally because I didn't clean the tables correctly or whatever.
Right.
So, and then that I'm going to be with you. I'm going to show you how. I'm going to help you bridge that gap. And I want you to get the bonus. So let's do this together. So that's the piece that is super important that people kind of forget sometimes.
And we're also always taking the feedback from our staff, our directors, when they're doing it. If there's a question on the checklist, like a why, like why does this have to be this way? Or what about if we did it this, or any changes? So not only are we always changing the SOPs, but we're always updating the checklist and the scorecards so that they do make sense for everybody's daily operations too.
So
and
smart.
each region has a slightly different scorecard too. So it's very specific, to their region, to their leadership, to their curriculum, and what makes sense.
One of the things that we recommend is the date of change and reason, because sometimes historically things change and because your data is going to show what it was then, what it is now, how it changes over time as you're starting to look at trends. And a lot of schools are kind of new to how to use the data, and you all have figured that out, how to use the data, but you use it as a motivator and as a reward system, which is amazing. So let's talk about your book as we come to the end of our Power Half Hour today. Vision Tree Leadership. You've just soft launched your book, and you're about to do signings. tell us about that and what can the readers expect?
So it's a teaching memoir. So it's got my story kind of woven into it. And it also has a little bit of magic sprinkled in because everything I do has to be magical.
Of course.
And it's the story, it's really Dorothy from Wizard of Oz's story and how that parallels kind of my universe and kind of how the champions that Dorothy meets along the way are similar to the champions that I've met along the way in my journey and how that has created the leader that I am and the leader that my team is and the legacy that I want to leave behind as a leader. And through it, I've given tools because I want it to be something that people like fold over, highlight, use over and over again in their leadership journey as well. And I have the magic framework throughout the book, which is M is for mindset, A is for assessing the pain points, G is for grounded and ruby slippers, I is for influence, and C is for clarity and capacity. And so that it talks about that and how to use those different framework, use the framework as a tool and to go back to it. Like, oh, I'm having a hard time. I need to go back to mindset. I need to go back to assessing the pain points, you know, how that works and can just continue to work over and over again.
So how can people get their hands on it?
So on May 12th, it's going to launch on Amazon. Super important because we want to get the best sellers list. So we want to try to get as many sales as we can on May 12th. But also I'm doing a book signing April 22nd in Atlanta, and then also April 23rd through 26th in Orlando at the Association of Early Learning Leaders Conference. And I'm doing another one in May, the week that it launches in San Diego in La Jolla. So
Outstanding. I can't wait to get my copy. I want it signed.
I know so many people are saying that. So I'm like, it will also be on my website, but I need somebody smarter than me. Jen, we need somebody smarter than us to figure out how to get it on our website.
That'll happen. That'll happen. So as we wrap up here, our audience has a takeaway from not only the book, but from today's conversation. I understand that you have a scorecard to offer us. Jen or Rachel, either one, do you want to tell us about that?
So we took a copy of our director scorecard that we use for all of our locations and created it into a Google Doc. So it is in a Google Sheet. So it also has the grading on it as how we base it on it, like whether it's all, some, or none, or the range of the scores, because that's where their final average comes from. So we can create that link and give that to everybody. So then you guys have access to an example and a template of how we created our scorecard.
That's awesome. That's a huge step up for those that are looking at scorecards. I highly recommend that you follow what's going on with Vision Tree Leadership. There are workshops, of course, the book. There's so many ways that you can really level up your leadership. But if you're in a position of growing or recognizing that you as a sole owner or maybe 3 schools or 5 and you have visions for growing, everybody needs a Jen. That's going to be the tagline. Everybody needs a Jen, but Gen G is Rachel's, but
No, you can't have her.
can't have her. But you've created a template for how that can work and work well. So thank you for the insights today, ladies. It was so enjoyable to have you share what the journey is. We've barely begun to scratch the surface, but I know in the book we're going to hear more about that and look forward to having you on future episodes. Thanks for being here.
Thank
Thank you.